In today's video, I'm going to go through a few key things that you need to really understand if you want to be a professional photographer. Now, this list isn't the entire list. This is just a few things that I think a lot of people let slip with, or they don't really see the importance of understanding. So I'm going to go through these one point at a time. So first up, and this is a fundamental law of photography or rule in photography that applies to everybody, you have to know the inverse square law. If you're working as a portrait photographer, natural light, artificial light, if you're a landscape photographer, it is absolutely vital that you understand the inverse square law. It will make everything seem so much easier. The amount of times I have people asking me how you do something in Photoshop, when in reality the way to achieve it is using the inverse square law. Next up is how to meter light. I'm not just talking about using a light meter like it's the 1980s. I'm not particularly good at mathematics, or at least not mental arithmetic, so it's something that I've had to work at a lot. But it saves me so much time. When a client asks me to do a particular shot and I go, right, I know exactly how that's going to look in my head. In my head, I close my eyes, I pencil draw the scene for some reason on white paper with no colour, and I scratch down all of the f-stops that I need it to be at. I then recreate the scene and it will look exactly how I envisage it in my head when I take that image. Being able to do that is absolutely vital if you want to work as a professional photographer. As well as understanding how to meter light, you need to understand colours. And that's how the colour wheel works and how to compose those colours within your scene. Now, I'm not going to be able to explain to you how all of these things work in this video because it'll end up being about 10 hours long, and even then it'll be vague. But you need to go away and do the research on these things. You know, jump onto Google, find some physics books, find some books outside of photography. Reading just within photography will not help you become a better photographer. You need to know everything in photography, but then you also need to read around the subject so you really have a good global understanding as to what's going on. Next on my list is hyperfocus and how to calculate it. And that's looking at the distance from the subject to the camera, the focal length, and the f-stop, and exactly what's going to fall into that plane of focus and how to calculate this. If you're working in anything where crucial focus is just so important that you've got to get it right. If you're photographing what have I got nearby? Hang fire. Hello. Spiced apple and cinnamon and Glade air freshener. If you're photographing this and you need to get the whole thing in focus and you're using a 100mm lens, you need to work out how far away the camera needs to be and at what aperture to get the whole thing in focus. This is so important, and it's not the sort of thing you can do with trial and error, especially if you've got 6 different items of different sizes being photographed for the same client and you want to get them all looking the same. There are calculators out there which will do this for you. You don't have to be able to do the mental arithmetic yourself, but you have to be aware of how hyperfocal works. And then when you're shooting this, not to focus at the very front of the item, making sure you're focusing the right bit so you get your 1/3 and 2/3 of hyperfocal distance pulling in the actual image. This goes right forward to understanding how view cameras and tilt shift lenses work. You may never need to use them, but you have to understand how they work, because sometimes you'll have a request to do something. And if you don't know this word exists, you have no chance of being able to go, well, actually, I can't possibly do it with my equipment. I need to use this. You need to understand things around what you're doing. Likewise, if you say you're an available light photographer, you still need to understand flash, or at least the basics. I can't retouch. My Photoshop skills are so poor, but I understand it. So when I'm producing an image for my editor, I give him something that he can do a good job with. Otherwise, I'm making all of our lives a misery. How to modify and shape light. Now, if you're a landscape photographer, you're probably thinking this doesn't apply to me, but it absolutely does. You need to understand the height of the sun, the cloud coverage, if there's foliage diffusing the light, if you're doing a more of a tight shot, for example, you still need to understand how to modify and shape light. Yes, you might not be able to wing those clouds across the scene, but you need to know that if you wait for 2 hours, the light's going to look a certain way. But if you do, you have to have this running through your head all the time. And if you're working with flash, you absolutely have to understand how to modify light. And this comes back in with the inverse square law as well. All of these things are so important that you have to understand them. I know a 3-light setup with a beauty dish called butterfly lighting with a rim light. That's not photography. That's just copying somebody's painting by numbers work. That is not what most clients want. They want something truly unique, and they'll ask you to start adjusting things. And if you don't understand fundamentally how you are at the lighting setup you're already at, you have no chance of making any adjustments of any use. Now, this one is key. This is how to manage your finances. As photographers, when we're starting out, the new toys, the new cameras, new lenses, they're really exciting. I'm filming this on a 5D Mark II from yesteryear. It's running off a USB 2 cable. I've got a 35mm prime lens that I've had for a decade. I've recently started a YouTube channel, which is probably why you're watching this. And the only thing I bought to do this was the microphone and the microphone stand. Because financially, it doesn't make sense for me to invest any more money into this at this stage. Now, yes, I could buy loads of fancy kit to make a really good job of this, but I need to know that I'm getting a return on that investment, because this is my job. My job is photography. And part of that is this YouTube channel now, because I'm trying not to get left behind and, be one of those dinosaurs in 30 years' time who goes, well, before YouTube, we just got work from Facebook. Because times are changing. That's my old people's voice. I should probably work on that or edit it out. But times are changing. I've got to stick with it, and I've got to make sure that my numbers add up. So when I look at the editing time I spend on my computers here, I can't spend days making these videos look perfect. How to calculate your day rate is absolutely paramount to being a photographer. It is the thing which slips up almost every aspiring professional. They don't charge enough because they're trying to get work, so they price cut people, and then they get really busy, but they're not making enough money. So by the time they come round to replacing their 2 camera bodies, they've not made enough money that year to replace them. So understanding how much you need to charge, and I've got a video on this, so I'll link it in the description, but give it a watch. Have a real hard think about what you need to charge, and this goes back to knowing your finances, knowing your numbers. You've got to make sure that you are making a profit. Yes, it's a creative industry. Yes, it's a really cool job to have, but that doesn't mean you can sacrifice making money in order to pursue it. The last one is something that's really difficult, and I'm not sure how much you can learn this, but it's knowing what looks best. I have people who have spent a day retouching an image, and I look at it and go, yeah, that's great. What you've done is technically brilliant, but it looks appalling. Nobody wants to see that. It's the same with bad fashion, bad music, bad anything. You have to have good taste. Now, where you get good taste from is sort of your environment, I guess. And, you don't have to be from some particularly wealthy background to have good taste. I come from a chavvy council estate. If you're from the States, I'm not sure what a chav translates to, but it's basically a council estate where people don't really have jobs and no one really does any work. So I don't have a particularly cultured youth, although my parents did a very good job and they made sure that I did get, far more culture than a lot of my peers got. Most of mine just comes from reading magazines, reading online articles, but not about photography. If you want to have a good taste in images, reading photography will not help that. That'll tell you how to technically achieve it and what is technically good. But what is actually, visually good and what is actually good to look at and what looks good and what's going to sell, that's completely different to what most photographers think of. There's sort of 2 worlds of photography. There's the internet photography world, and the images that you'll find on the internet photography websites, they have no relationship to commercial photography over here. They are 2 very different genres. The people who do really well on Instagram and all the rest of it taking pictures, they mostly make money selling presets and things like this. They're not actually commercial photographers. And the only reason I know this is, if I had a portfolio of that work, I wouldn't get booked. The work I have might not be as pleasing to some people, but to big brands, they really want to see my work. That's what they're looking for. I hope this video is of some use to you. It's just a few things that you need to really hone down on before you make the leap to becoming a professional photographer. You've got to go away and you've got to do the reading. You've got to really, put the effort and time in to learn around these principles. And this is not a definitive list. This is just what I could fit into about an 11-minute video. If you did enjoy this, do hit like, do subscribe to the channel, let your friends know, and I'll see you all next time.